Dear Sylvia, remember when you and me would try and find the secret rooms in the house? And once we stumbled upon the attic, which Mother and Father had been keeping from us, mostly because it was filled with old junk and bats, but you and I thought we'd stumbled upon heaven. We tried keeping the fact that we knew the entrance to the attic away from Mother and Father, but, well, Mother knew our clothes weren't getting dusty for no reason at all. I had so much fun up there, making up stories and digging through old stuff with you. Sometimes I wish I could just go back to one of those days, before we had to grow up and keep the dust bunnies off of our socks. I miss the house, Sylvia, and I miss you too. The Everest Society has lots of hidden rooms, but none of them are exciting. At least, not without you, they aren't. D.
When the blinding light faded, I was sitting on the floor of someone else's living room. I glanced around. It was the same space as Schneekalakun's apartment, but the furnishing was all different and antique-y. But the surprising thing about it was that although the furniture was antique, it all looked new. I glanced over at a clock on the wall. It read 5 minutes past noon. I had that button clicker thingy in my hand, and the camera, the time machine that is, was standing across from me. I blinked a couple of times. I had really done it. I had time traveled. I realized that I was in someone's apartment, someone who didn't know me at all. And although they were probably gone, I really didn't want to risk being arrested, especially in a time I didn't belong in. I folded the camera back into its box, tucked it under my arm, and walked out of the apartment. Out on the street, I felt people's eyes upon me almost instantly. There they were in their dresses, suit jackets, and ties. And then there was me in my t-shirt and jeans, not exactly fitting in. I didn't belong here, and everyone could sense it. I froze in place as the waves of accurately dressed people flooded around me. The streets I knew so well in the 21st century, seemed suddenly foreign and hard to navigate. I was lost in a place that I had spent my whole life in. Except, this wasn't exactly the same place. The roads were a little different, the buildings and shops even more so. I needed to go somewhere to ask someone where the Everest Society was located, but I had no idea where anything was, much less the Everest Society itself. Actually, there was only one place that I knew would be exactly the same. It was around in the 21st century, and it was definitely here today. My great-grandmother Sylvia's house. Even though I had only ever been to Sylvia's house a couple of times, the route was still fresh in my mind from the funeral. I made my way to Sylvia's house. It was only a couple of blocks from where Schneekalakun's apartment was, although the city faded into suburbs as Sylvia's house drew nearer. As I approached her house, the details of its decay suddenly came into view, and rather startlingly too. Even long ago, when the house was still well lived in, it was a mess. The dull, sickly green paint was peeling off the sides of the house, and the lawn was unkempt. In fact, looking at it more, I wondered if it was in better shape in the 21st century than it was now. I walked up the stone pathway to the decrepit house. The stairs creaked under my feet as I walked up to the door. When I tapped the door to knock, it whooshed open, and a cloud of dust rose from within. I coughed and stepped into the dark, chalky house. Hello?
Huh?
A small, feeble voice echoed softly from across the house. Hello? I walked down the hallway to where I had heard the voice. Are you Sylvia? A woman was sitting on the edge of the bed of the room I peeked my head into. She looked up at me as I tentatively made my way in. She frowned, pulling at a strand of her tangled hair.
I've already paid my rent this month,
she said softly. Oh, no, I'm not here to collect your rent.
Oh.
I fidgeted uneasily. I was wondering if you could, help me with something. Sylvia stared at me blankly.
Like what?
Her voice was almost a whisper. I was wondering if you could tell me about the Everest Society? Her clouded face grew more confused.
Are you a friend of Denver's?
Denver?
Yes. Do you know my brother?
What does your brother have to do with the Everest Society?
He's a member. You want to know about the Everest Society, so you must have come to talk about Denver.
Her eyes narrowed.
Right.
Oh, well, I wanted to find out where they were located. The Everest Society, that is. I thought, with your brother, that you might know. Sylvia stared at me for a long moment before answering.
How don't you know? It's the biggest building in the city. Everyone knows where it is.
The biggest building in the city? I'm new to town. Could you possibly elaborate? She gave me a strange look and sighed.
It's in Ivory Square.
Thank you. I'm sorry for intruding on you and your property. You've been really helpful, Sylvia.
Okay.
And with that single word, she laid down and rolled over on her bed. As I walked down the street away from the house, it seemed I couldn't distance myself from it quickly enough. The shadow of the house seemed to loom over me even several blocks away. All I could think of was the look on Sylvia's face, the pale, blank look of utter confusion and emptiness. I shook my head as if to rid myself of the image. I couldn't. Holding the camera tightly in my arms, I rushed to Ivory Square as fast as I could. It wasn't called Ivory Square in the 21st century, but I had a pretty good idea of the area Sylvia might be talking about. There was a large fountain in the middle of the city that was often referred to as the Hub. No one knew its formal name, but the city seemed to branch off from there. The formal name might just as well have been Ivory Square. I headed that way. When I arrived at the square, I saw an immense slate-colored building. The large archway was framed by huge green silk banners with the mantra I had heard before, "We care about trees." The building was, now that I thought of it, still around in my time, but it had grown. It already towered over the neighboring buildings, but I could see where it ended now. Back in my time, it seemed to go on forever. Staring at the towering fortress, I began to realize I was stuck. I could go into the Everest Society right now, but what would I do? I had rushed into the past too quickly. I was too far in over my head, and I had no plan. I retreated from the watchful eye of the society doors into an alleyway. I set up the camera and pulled out the button. I remembered that Bedford had said that if I pressed the button again, it would bring me back to the 21st century, and this was what I needed to do. I didn't know what I was doing here. I didn't belong in this time, and I needed to go back. I pressed the button and closed my eyes as the world around me faded away.
Hi. The Everest Letters is a production of the Everest Society. It was produced and written by Laura Archibald and Maddie Theobald. The voice of Dee is James Rutherford. The voice of Bethany is Ellie Bodeli. The voice of Sylvia is Iovita. Music is by Tommy Dorsey. We love you, Tommy Dorsey. Heart. As always, thanks for listening. Tune in next time for episode 5.